Well, hello and welcome to our live stream where we're going to take a deep dive into how to stand out to employers as a top ignition developer. My name is Dwayne Butcher, Director of Marketing here at Flexware Innovation, and I'll serve as your host and your moderator for our short session today. You also see on the screen Matt Hayden, Director of People Operations here at Flexware. I'll introduce him more in just a moment, but first, a couple of logistics. We are scheduled to go for around 30 minutes in our session today. If you have questions, by all means, feel free to post those in the LinkedIn Live chat area, and we will field what we can. And if we cannot get to any or all questions, we will respond to them offline. So please keep those questions coming in. And then finally, we are recording today's session, so you can look for a post shortly after our session begins or ends. Well, let me bring in our guest today, Matt Hayden. To say that Matt has been an important part of Flexware and our culture would be it'd be an understatement. When Matt started here at Flexware, Matt, was it 30, 35 people?
37. I was number 37.
You were number 37. We now have just over 200 employees. So Matt has had a direct hand in the hiring of everywhere from number 38 to number 200, has been very instrumental. So Matt has obviously a clear knack for evaluating talent. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring Matt on here, as we talk about how to stand out to employers. Matt's been on the other side of that for many years and many hires. So, Matt, did I forget anything in that introduction? Anything else you want to add besides you being
No,
a golf pro?
I do like to play golf on the side, so that's a very important point there. But no, thanks for that introduction, Dwayne. Very generous of you, and I think what I often say about what I get to do and helping people find jobs is our team here at Flexware gets to solve technical problems for our clients, and I like to solve the people problems. And in this case, it's bringing in the right talent, making sure that they're going to be successful here, and to me, that's the exciting part of the role.
Hmm. And so you've been here how long now?
It's been just about 7.5 years. So
7.5 years.
I've actually been in recruiting now for nearly 10 years in some sort of technical recruiting capacity for about 10 years now.
Yeah, great. Well, I've got a list of questions that I've got teed up here to go through. So how about I just fire away?
Sounds good.
And let's kind of start at a higher level here. Since you've been in and around Flexware, you've seen Ignition come onto the scene here within our company and then really throughout industry in a very big way.
Mhm.
I'm curious, how has the landscape changed over these past many years that you've been involved with Flexware and Ignition specifically?
Yeah, I think when I first started at Flexware, Ignition was just kind of 7-8 years ago, and it was, for lack of a better term, a tool in the industry that people worked with. And then there was about roughly right around 5 or 6 years ago, I think, is when it really kind of started to take off, where specifically Flexware took an interest in it. We had two individuals that said, hey, I kind of see this tool as something that's going to take the industry and do some neat things with it. And so they actually wanted to start a team here at Flexware that was just solely focused on doing ignition projects, which was new to Flexware at the time. We had never focused singularly on one particular technology. So in the grand scheme of things, I think what we have done at Flexware signifies kind of what Ignition has done in the industry. It started with those two individuals, and just as some growth stats here, by the end of 2022, which was about a 5-year period for us, that team had gone from about that 2 or 3 to about 10. So you have roughly a 200% increase or so there. But in the last year is when it's really gone. So at the end of 2022, like I said, we were about 10 people on the Ignition team that were only doing ignition projects. And then we are now up to 28 people that are just on our ignition team. So we've seen about another 250% increase in people doing only ignition projects here at FlexWare. And I think that signifies kind of what ignition is doing in the market, that you're having people dedicated to only doing those types of projects.
Hmm. And what's interesting, Matt, I don't know if you have these stats or not, but we have others who are not on the ignition team, but who are actually doing ignition development. Um, so our team is
Yeah,
actually even larger than just that team
and
itself.
I think that's a really good point, Dwayne, that if you take that and kind of expand it outside of FlexWare, if you're in a manufacturing facility, you might have one or two people dedicated to just doing ignition, but that doesn't mean that, the controls engineers or manufacturing engineers or whoever else is in those facilities might not be touching ignition. And that is very true here at FlexWare too, for all of our teams, that
Yeah,
they may be working with ignition in another capacity, but we have people dedicated to only doing ignition projects.
yeah. And so for clarification here for our listeners, why did we explain how much the ignition team here at FlexWare has grown? Primarily to give Matt probably wouldn't admit this, but it's to give Matt some credibility. He's hired a whole lot of ignition developers, and he's been looking through resumes and over that time to find what are the top tier ignition developers. What are some of those qualities? So that transitions to the next question. What are the key skills and qualities would you say that employers are looking for in a developer?
Yeah, I think ignition has really been on something neat in the industry where, again, you had people that were doing using the platform in the past, but as it's evolved, what's ended up happening is you can take maybe a controls engineer or manufacturing engineer or something along those lines, and if that engineer knows a little bit about coding, they can use ignition and grow and develop it. So there's that aspect. But one of the big things that if we're looking for skills and qualities that ignition allows for is actually software engineers that are coming out of school, or maybe you have a software engineering background, like a computer science background, to actually make that leap of computer science into the manufacturing space. And ignition is kind of a catalyst for that. So while ignition can do a lot of things, looking for those skills depend on kind of what the actual facility is looking to do with it. But what it's really allowed for is if you're a controls engineer and you like a little bit of programming with Python, or even getting into databases with SQL, you have the ability to use ignition in some new and different ways. But then if you're not even close to being in industry and don't know anything about manufacturing, you can take ignition and learn the industry and use your computer science background. So you can kind of take a combination of different skills, and it just really depends on what that particular employer is looking for. But I think one of the biggest things that I would say that can't be overlooked these days when it comes to ignition developers, or really any position, is, do you have problem solving skills? I actually went to school for elementary education, and I won't go into all the fun details of why I'm not doing that anymore. But I think that's one of the biggest things lacking these days, is people being able to problem solve. So if you have the ability to problem solve and look at something and figure out how can we get to a solution, I think that's a huge skill that employers are looking for, that is kind of lacking these days.
Hmm. I'm curious, Matt, as you look at resume, can you see if someone has problem solving skills by that, or does that come out more from the face-to-face interview, or how do you ferret that out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I get that asked a lot about, like, what do you look for in a resume? And I don't know if there's a one size fits all, but I have heard, or you may have heard from recruiters that, like, hey, I can look at a resume in 3 seconds and know if I want to talk to somebody, and that's true. Like,
Hmm.
I will look at a resume within 3 seconds, and I'm making a determining factor if I want to have a conversation with that individual or not.
Hmm.
So to your question, Dwayne, about problem solving, I think once you start to dive in there and stuff, you can probably see some little hints to that. But it really comes down to the conversation with the candidate to see if they really have those problem solving skills.
Hmm. So let me move on to the next question, which also touches on skills. But so even here at FlexWare, we do work for water, wastewater, treatment facilities. We do work in manufacturing. Um, how important is industry-specific knowledge as you go into an ignition development role?
Yeah, I'm going to take both sides of the coin on this one. So I think if you have the industry specific knowledge, whether it's a particular manufacturing, water, wastewater, wherever it is you're coming from, that is a huge advantage, especially as employers are looking to skill up their workforce. There is so much investment these days. In fact, I saw something the other day from Deloitte that said back in 2020, manufacturers alone spent over $26 billion in training programs for their employees. So that can look like maybe we want to skill up and maybe actually get them some programming skills, send them to a coding boot camp or get them to know some database skills, because then they can actually translate that into using Ignition or other tools. But that idea of using the industry knowledge that you have and skilling up those people goes a long way. So you can have that industry knowledge and then skill up people that want to get into that a little bit more. If you don't have industry specific knowledge in manufacturing, I still think that's okay because of the way things are going. You have workforce that are actually, obviously we're right in the middle of them kind of coming out of the workforce and retiring. So they have all that tribal knowledge that they need to get rid of. So if you have a software background and want to use Ignition, going into that with that experience and being able to learn from somebody that's been in the industry and wanting to transfer that knowledge so that they can retire can go a long way as well. So I think the good employers are the ones that are open to both sets of skills there, whether they need it or not.
Great. Can you share some strategies? Let's say just if you want to showcase or really highlight your ignition skills and experience, you have any strategies for how to really make that stand out on a resume?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, I may sound like a broken record here, is be honest about your experiences. Sure, you can show your technical skills, like, I've done Python programming or VB.NET or C Sharp, or I've done SQL programming, and you can show those technical experiences, and those do go a long way to make sure that you're showcasing what those are that you have. But at the same time, be honest about what you know and don't know. And so if you don't know something, that's okay. Us see for the employer or not. So, but if you're listing your technical experience, that's always a good starting point. But also, don't overemphasize something. I'm going to simplify something here. Is that if you have worked as a cashier at a fast food restaurant, if you put something to the effect of like worked with customers to obtain the proper order and manage cash flow of the business, I'm going to start to question, what have you actually done? And looking at those other bullet points on your resume, are you exaggerating those as well, or are you being honest about what you know or don't know? And so just being honest about what is on your resume and everything, and list that out, that's the best experience that you can put on your resume.
Hmm. So, since we're talking about resumes, I'm going to go ahead and field a couple of questions that have come in here. Um, I'm curious, have you seen any influence by AI, Chat GPT, any resume assistance tools? Have you seen any influence from those at this point, or could you even tell?
I'm sure at some point we'll see more of it.
Yeah,
I don't think I've been able to tell at this point.
yeah.
If there are, I think as we get more and more into it, we'll start to see some of those trends of, hey, maybe this word or that word probably was generated by Chat GPT or something. And I think it's one of those, as you talk to a candidate too, I'm going to see, does your tone match the tone of your resume?
Yeah.
So if you have a different tone of how you're communicating versus what's on your resume, then I'll be able to see that. But I don't think we're quite far enough yet that I've been able to see that trend.
I guess one way or another, you're going to be exposed,
That's right.
whether you can figure it out by looking at the resume or whether it comes through the interview part. So,
Yes.
um, so another question that came in related to resumes is, does the resume design matter? You mentioned that you have this 3-second ability to, or a lot of recruiters have this ability to look in 3 seconds and decide if it's somebody you want to talk to. Does the resume design matter in that?
I wouldn't say it really matters, but in a sense it does. If you're just, it looks like an old typewriter format type, that's not going to go very far because, your resume, I always say, is like your shoe. And if you want to get your shoe in the door, your foot in the door, you need to give the employer a little bit about what it is. So if they're looking for a dress shoe, at least make your resume kind of look like a dress shoe. If they're looking for a work boot, give them a work boot. That's your foot in the door. So yes, the design does matter slightly, but it's not the end all be all in how it is. I think another kind of key with resumes is being concise in the bullet points that you're putting there, because that's really what I'm looking at. I'm looking at the bullet points first, and then I'm going to go to your title and then your experiences. So if you're listing certain technologies in your bullet points, that's going to grab the attention of the recruiter first, and that's going to make me want to dig deeper. And so the key with bullet points is give enough information to make me curious to go deeper, but not enough information that I got to read through it to figure out what it is. It's finding that middle ground with all of it.
So on the topic of resume design, is there a way to make a resume stand out as an Ignition developer? Um, and if you don't have an answer to that, that's fine. But is there anything that you would recommend that will make somebody stand out as a developer?
So two things on that is, sure, you can put all the keywords in there, right? Our ATSs or applicant tracking systems that when you apply, those go into that database of an ATS. And yes, we can search on those keywords, so ignition or inductive automation or something along those lines to pull that information out. So it is good to put those keywords in there. But once we actually start looking at the resume, we're going to find that either you're putting the keywords in there to make us see the resume, or you're actually using it for actually what it's intended to be. So I think it's finding that that right balance of what have you actually done in Ignition. In this case, I used it as a SCADA application and was able to connect it to a database of another application. And if you can list that out, that's going to pique my interest that you've got actually some deep experience with Ignition, or used it as an HMI and was able to build different uh, capacities of it on the manufacturing line. So as long as you can say what you have done with Ignition, that's what we're really looking for.
So here's a question I just thought of. I've not had a lot of experience at this, but a lot of websites will have forms that you're filling in to apply. Are you actually looking at a resume at any point, or are you just looking at the database?
Yeah, no, I actually do want to look at the resume because again, it's
Yeah.
kind of your shoe, your foot. So, um, yeah, I could go on about the different types of application processes and stuff. What you should be able to do is just input your resume. It uploads. If you're having to put the same information that's on your resume in an application, I say that's not a very good application process. So yes, we want to look directly at the resume because we're going to be looking at your direct experiences. So that application sometimes makes you repeat the process, which in my opinion isn't a good process.
Does one page versus 2 pages matter?
That's the age-old question
Or
when it comes to
5?
resumes. Yeah, or 5 or 10. Um, for me as a recruiter, it doesn't matter if it's 1 or 2 or 3 pages type thing. Just make it appropriate for your skills. If you're a college grad coming out and it's 3 pages, that's probably too long. But if you're 10 years into, 15, 20 years into industry and it needs to be 2 or 3 pages to showcase what you've done, that's okay. So as long as it's appropriate. Now, I think if you go past 3 or 4 pages, then it's getting to be a little heavy. So I think kind of that 2 to 3 at max is really kind of the sweet spot depending on your experience.
Okay, perfect. So let's move away from resumes for just a moment. Although this is something that would appear on our resume, and that's certifications. What role do those play in ignition development, in demonstrating proficiency in ignition
hmm
development?
So I think you can ask 20 different companies and 20 different recruiters and get 40 different answers on this. I'll give you what I believe as far as certifications, and I'm not saying this is all, but I think certifications are great as a baseline to understand where a starting point is, but they don't end up being the end all be all. Like if you, the experience is more applicable than the certification. Obviously, you have to start somewhere. So if you start with the certification, then you're like, okay, I've got the cert. Who's going to give me an opportunity to get the experiences? That's a great starting point. I think where it becomes a little bit sometimes where people think I've got the certifications, I'm able to do everything within ignition.
Yeah,
That's not the mentality to have.
yeah,
But if you go and get the experience and then like, hey, I can go get a certification now, that's where more value is in the certification to me, in my opinion.
yeah. So simply seeing a certification on a resume isn't the end all be all. It's you want to see some actual project work and experience that kind of shows that you took that certification deeper.
Yep. And there can be an evolution too. Let's say you're again maybe a controls engineer that wants to do more in the SCADA or MES lane with ignition. If you have done 2 or 3 years, 5 years, 10 years of controls work, but you want to move into that and you go get your certification, you've got some industry knowledge and building upon those things. So that will go a ways as well. That at least you've gone and gotten the certification and you're making an attempt to do there. Again, it's kind of a baseline to build upon.
Hmm. So we talked about how many people you've hired over the last several years. I wonder how many resumes you've actually seen. How many have crossed your desk? Um, and so I use that as kind of a springboard to this question. Because you've seen so many resumes, are there any common mistakes that you've seen ignition developers make in their job search process? And not specific to resumes, although it could be.
Um, I think the biggest thing is over exaggerating your experience, or sometimes it can even go the opposite way. You undersell and you're not selling
Mm,
yourself well enough. So
mm,
you have to be able to be concise and know what you need to communicate for what that particular company or manufacturing facility or whatever is looking for,
mhm,
and kind of make it applicable to that. So that would be the biggest thing, right? Again, I think it's more the mistakes people make once they're having a conversation with a recruiter or the hiring manager or whatever. If they get their foot in that door and they're having those conversations then with the employer, what ends up happening is a lot of times they will oversell themselves on what they can, as you should be doing, right? It's an interview. You want to showcase your skills, but you have to again be honest. I'm going to sound like a little bit of a broken record in that it's okay to say I don't know about
mm,
something. A hiring team, no matter what employer they're with, they're just trying to figure out what you know and don't know. And it's not a, if you say I don't know, that shouldn't be a disqualifier
yeah,
unless
yeah,
it's you just don't know anything. So
yeah.
um, I think that's more of the mistakes.
The I don't know. I can't speak for every company out there, but I know at Flexware that actually plays well because one of our core values is never stop learning, right? So if you don't know, that's okay as long as you have those skills to go find the answers and to actually know, right? So um,
Yes, that's exactly right.
so let me move on here. Um, Are there any specific types of projects or experiences that are going to make an ignition developer stand out?
I think it's really going to be, have you implemented or used ignition in a manufacturing facility, or what have you actually used it for? And then it's not only like maybe you've worked in a facility that has ignition, but then what we're going to dig into is what have you actually done with that particular application in your facility? And so being able to showcase that, like, implemented Ignition where it wasn't in there before, right? That's a huge starting point there, that if you were the one to help bring it into the facility, that's great. Or maybe it was there and not being used very much. Maybe it was just an HMI screen on a particular machine, but you helped evolve it all the way to a full SCADA solution within the full facility, or even an MES solution. So being able to show taking it from point A to point B, whatever that may be, and that you were actually part of that, that's going to be what really stands out.
So on the topic of projects and experiences, question came in. Somebody's struggling to actually list on a resume the number of projects, the number of experiences that they've had. Do you have recommendations on how to list that project work in a way that gets the point across without, the resume end up being 10 pages? How do you do that with brevity and still show the depth and breadth of your work?
Yeah, I think if you're in so let's use Flexware, right? We're a systems integrator. So our job is to work with different clients, and, an Ignition developer here might have worked on over a 3-year period. Maybe that's 5 or 6 or 7 or more Ignition projects for different clients. So even stating something as simple as worked with 7 different clients on Ignition projects, and then you might list out 1 or 2 of them, the 2 that maybe you're most proud of, to showcase what you've done with it. So I'm going to tell you about 2 of them, and or whatever, for these particular 2. And again, that goes to, it gives me some information. Now I get to ask you some questions as a recruiter about those, and like, oh, at least let's pick out your favorite one, or let's maybe pick out your least favorite one, and why was it your least favorite one?
Yeah. So we're live streaming this on LinkedIn. How can Ignition developers leverage social media to maybe get their name out there, just enhance their professional presence?
Yeah. So as a recruiter that uses LinkedIn to go and find people, just even having that presence, being able to go and say, hey, I have a LinkedIn profile. A recruiter is going to, hopefully find me if that's what I'm looking for. But it allows us to contact you, right? So that's the first step. Then it's really a resume on top of that, and you're basically kind of doing a mini resume with your LinkedIn profile of worked with 7 Ignition projects, and here's 2 that I've actually worked with. And then it's, you can obviously, with the posts and the different things that you can do on LinkedIn, maybe actually putting up, if you're able to. Obviously there's NDAs and all that stuff in place, and you may not be able to put up, but if you can put something up about a project that you've done, that goes a long way to boost your social media presence and all that, if that's what you're trying to accomplish.
What about leadership roles? Somebody's an Ignition developer. They may not want to stay a developer long term. What if they want to move into leadership roles? And like I know at Flexware we've got team leads and that are kind of overseeing a number of developers. Any advice for somebody looking to move from developer into a leadership role?
I think the biggest piece of advice, and I don't remember where I got it, it would be great to be able to credit that, is if you want to move into a leadership role, do the role that you're in really well, and the leadership will find you. And so if you're doing that, and maybe using social media as that, like if you're saying, hey, I helped lead this project, from start to finish, it's going to show that you have that capability to do that. Or, worked with a group of 5 people to bring this to fruition. So being able to showcase that you were led projects, but, again, maybe it's the DNA of Flexware and just kind of that maybe coming out a little bit. But if you just go do your role, the leadership will follow. And I think that's the best advice I can give to do that. So.
Yeah, maybe another way to say it is if you want to be a leader, start acting like a leader, and
yeah,
it'll
that's a real
follow.
good way to put it.
Yeah. So we're just about at our target time here, but I wanted to, as a recruiter, I would be remiss if I didn't give you this opportunity, Matt. What makes Flexware different and competitive?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is what we've seen with Ignition developers is maybe they've done the one project in their manufacturing facility where they either brought it in or they took it from point A to point B, and now it's like, hey, we kind of did that, and now it's almost in maintenance mode, for lack of a better term.
Mm,
Where here at Flexware, we get to go do that for each customer, whether it's implement it
mm,
or evolve it from point A to point B. So you're getting to work on that next new project with a
mm,
new client, whatever that is. And some of those projects might be a couple weeks to a couple months to some pretty long embedded ones where they're continuing to evolve it over a year or two, and stuff like that. We have a couple customers like that as well. So if you really like that idea of kind of making sure it's going forward and then it doesn't just get into maintenance mode,
mm.
that's kind of definitely an advantage for Flexware. And then, um, to your point, Dwayne, I wouldn't, if I didn't talk about our culture and just kind of who Flexware is. I think, one of the things that I always say that helps with this is what drew me to Flexware is as a agency recruiter that all of our engineers have been contacted by agency recruiters in some capacity. Um, is you get to know lots of different companies and stuff. And the one when I was working as an agency and we were recruiting for Flexware, I was like, there's something different about that company. And at the time, I couldn't put my finger on it. But once I got in here, you realize there is something different. We care for our people. We want what's best for them. We get to solve some pretty cool technical problems for our customers. And so you add those three things up along with a couple other things. And I'm reminded a lot of a Lou Holtz quote that I heard because I'm a huge Notre Dame fan. And I know that probably goes against all the Purdue engineers that we have here, is that somebody asked Lou Holtz to explain the mystique of Notre Dame football, and he said, "If you've ever been here, no explanation is necessary. If you haven't, no explanation will suffice." And I think that
Mm,
kind of sums up Flexware's culture. You just have to experience it.
mm. Yeah, Matt, I personally love hearing you talk about Flexware's culture because you believe it, and it comes out as you're describing it to others. So thanks for being such a great representative of all the Flexware employees here.
Thank you,
Well,
Dwayne.
that takes us to the end of our target time. So Matt, thanks for taking time to join me today. Perhaps this is a an ongoing conversation, but we'll at least put this one in the books and consider this phase complete. Thanks to those who watched us live, and thanks to the many more of you that are going to be watching this on demand. And of course, you are certainly welcome to check out Flexware Innovation if you're looking to expand your experiences and contribute to the fascinating work that at least that we do. You can visit flexwareinnovation.com, and we've got a careers page up there. Would love to hear from you. So thanks again to everyone. Casey, thank you for being behind the scenes and getting this all up and running. And Matt, thanks again. Have a good day, everyone.